Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Velocity Lake, episode 65. That's right guys, we're on the final stretch now. There's only going to be 70 episodes in this series, so we're rapidly running out of things to do. But today really is a long time coming. We need to fix the horrific job I did with the road system here. I don't know how I never noticed it, and I never noticed it myself at all. The only reason I realized there was even something wrong was because all of you guys in the comment section said, Matt, why have you built it like this? That's dumb, it doesn't work. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And I looked at it and I was like, oh, yeah, you're completely right here. Internet comments for once. Basically, I designed this to be like a British highway system, like a raised A road, so to speak, and there's slip roads. So you can come off this road on that curving thing to the left. That's how you get to the park. And then you can, once you've left the park, you can rejoin the road using the other slipway, which has now been destroyed because it was going the same way as the slipway on the other side, meaning that this entire thing is just a giant one-way street, which of course makes no sense, so we need to address that. So that's what we're going to do in this episode here. And that's why it's kind of funny, because even then, when people made the comment, I was like, what are you guys talking about? It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. These are probably just Americans who don't understand that some countries drive on the left. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, yes, no, I put my hands up, guys. You were completely right. I don't know how I didn't see that. So that's what we're addressing in this video here. Now, roads in Planet Coaster are quite tricky to build because there is no real road piece. I know the obvious answer is, why don't you just use paths? And paths as roads do work pretty well. One downside is they are limited to being 8 meters in diameter, I believe, is the maximum width you can have, which, you know, some major roads at least tend to be a little bit wider than 8 meters, but more problematic in this case, they don't really handle slopes and inclines very well. Paths as roads, they work well when the entire road is flat and there's no sort of rises and drops, but when we're trying to do a nice smooth ramp like this, it doesn't really work, because the paths, they kind of have a sort of... Did you guys ever play... I'm assuming a lot of you play Roller Coaster Tycoon, so you kind of get... Or Planet Coaster, so you kind of get how the paths work. But I realized that a lot of comments on these videos, they say, oh, I don't play Planet Coaster, I just like listening to the commentary. So now I kind of feel obliged to explain certain things with this game that might not seem particularly obvious to those that don't play it. Basically, when you build a flat path in Planet Coaster and then you want it to transition into a slope, it's not like... I don't know, like a skateboard ramp where it's a nice smooth curve. It's literally just flat, and then it immediately snaps up to, I don't know, 30 degrees or whatever the incline is. And they tend to be quite steep as well, which again is pretty much fine for paths, but for roads, you probably want it to be a little bit smoother for heavy goods vehicles, things like that. So the only real way you can have paths descend and ascend at acceptable kind of rates and then, you know, transition into flat again is by either building, like trying to make the terrain follow the path, follow like the course that you want the path to follow, then you just place the path along the terrain, which can be difficult to do because the terrain tools are not really very good at that. They're good for like hills and natural craters and stuff, but very flat, smooth slopes, it's not so great. You have to spend a long time playing with it. The other way you can do smooth transitions is by basically... how can I describe this? It's hard to describe without some sort of visual reference, but basically, you place a single path tile at whatever altitude you want the slope to end at, and then, I don't know, a few meters down the way, you place another single tile, just a tiny bit lower than the first, and then you sort of drag the path tool, like the cursor, to a point in between those two spots that you just placed, and the path tool kind of auto-generate a span between them, and it creates a nice smooth slope that you wouldn't be able to achieve any other way. That's a little tip I learned. I believe it was from a Masked Bandit video. So great little tip just there. I've probably done a terrible job explaining it, but just go and watch a real Planet Coaster YouTuber, not poser like me, and you can learn lots of fun tricks to do with this game. Anyway, I guess I could talk a little bit about what I'm doing on screen. I feel like a lot of it's going to be quite repetitive, so I felt like you guys have probably figured it out at this point what I'm doing, but some of you may have wondered why I placed that big wooden path just there, because it looks very ugly, and you are correct, it's not here to stay. I'm just using that as a guide because I had to place this curve manually myself, and it's quite hard to make curves just like freehand. Like often it's very hard to do without some sort of guide. So I've seen some builders make like roller coaster track to serve as a template for curves. I used a path in this instance, but really it doesn't really matter. In fact, I think I've built bridges before as well. Like I think one of the arch bridges in this park, I created an arch using a roller coaster track first, and then just followed along using the scenery pieces, and that was a little cool thing. So it's kind of cool to like you can use rides and paths in this game to create guides for yourself, make things a little bit easier. And I think there we are. We've got a pretty nice road structure there. I did realize that I've made a nice smooth transition to ground level there, but I forgot that I'd actually made this a little bit too high. It's a bit easier to place initially when you make it higher than you need it to be, and then after you finish building it, you just drop the whole thing down. But of course that means that then our actual slope to ground level is now below ground. But as you can see, it wasn't a particularly difficult operation. I just excised some of the downward slope and then just shifted that downward transition to flat backwards a little bit and joined them up together, and it worked out pretty well. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. And I think generally I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. The actual smoothness of the ascent up to the highway level I think is fairly realistic. The one thing I don't think is particularly realistic is I think the actual corner that the road takes in order to get the cars going the right direction to join the A road, it's a bit tight. The actual diameter of the circle that forms the curve. What a great sentence that was. It's a bit tight, but I was limited by the map size of Planet Coaster, unfortunately. In an ideal world, we would have had it sort of extend a little bit further out. Like, as you look at it on screen now, it would have gone a little bit further to the left to have a larger radius for that corner, but we are right on the edge of the map, and it just wasn't possible. And at this point, I really couldn't be bothered to try and engineer a different solution, so this is fine. Although the road is very narrow. Like, two cars can stick together along this road, and they're not going to hit each other, but it'd be very, very close. And cornering at high speed like this, especially if there's an articulated truck that's probably going to cut the corner in places and cross over to the second lane, I thought it would be a bit precarious. So although there is that central road marking to allow, 2 lanes of traffic, I will be getting rid of that. And of course, having the 2 lanes of traffic does mean that the actual merging onto the A road is a little bit hairier than perhaps would be safe. So we will be getting rid of that central marking just there. But we got a pretty nice road so far. Now, as you can see, you may have noticed there are lots and lots of street lamps on this road, and that is by design. I didn't actually intend to have all of those street lamps there once it was built, but I wanted all the street lamps to be in the same spot relative to the rest of the road. Like, I wanted them to be at the same height and in the same position on that little white barrier fence relative to all the other street lamps. And the easiest way of doing this is just you might have seen I was building the entire road out of one small segment with the street lamp on it. It's much easier to just have every segment be a clone of each other with a street lamp, and then just delete the street lamps as appropriate. Once it's all done, that way I'm going to worry about placing all the street lamps individually, and they're already automatically in the right spot. Now, obviously, one downside of me building this all out of one segment was that, and on the inside of the corner just there, the fences do clip together in kind of weird ways, so we'll have to do a little bit of manual tweaking just there to get it looking nice, but yeah, it wasn't a big job overall, so it's not really too much of a downside. And hey, presto, look at that. We've got a pretty nice looking road just there. And again, I made things difficult for myself by having this road be elevated. For my next park, which has still got the working title of Loopy Lagoon, all of the road infrastructure is going to be at ground level. There's not going to be any raised parts. I think part of it is on a bridge, but the bridge just goes from, like, it's over a ravine, I think, or a lagoon or something. It's probably over a lagoon. It's been so long. It's been like 5 days since I played the save file, guys, and my memory, it's on a 4-day cycle, so I just don't remember these things. But yes, I believe the bridge, it's just ground level, and then it just goes over a ravine, but still at ground level relative to the rest of the map. And then as it exits the bridge, it's just back at ground level again. So the road itself doesn't need to do any altitude change. It just goes from being a road on the ground to a road above water. So that's what I have to say about that. And the reason for that is because it's just very difficult to make paths like this, or roads like this, sorry. And again, I had to make the roads out of scenery pieces because it's elevated, and the kind of structure I'm doing here, it's very hard to make with paths. With the new park, most of the road is made with paths, and I've kind of done it in such a way that the paths look pretty nice, and anything that isn't the paths, I've just done with terrain paint rather than having to sort of force create out of scenery pieces. So the transition from path to non-path road, it's seamless. Like, I use the black tarmac path and then the black tarmac ground texture to create the roads, and there's no difference in the actual texture of the texture and color of that ground texture and path, so it's much easier to make realistic looking roads. So I think although Velocity Lake's road system looks pretty nice, it does look a bit rough around the edges in places. Like I say, the inside of this corner just here doesn't look particularly neat, and there's a few things. I mean, this is the first time I've built roads in Planet Coaster, so it really was a bit of a learning experience. So this is really just sort of the beta for the roads that are going to be in Loopy Lagoon, and I'm very happy with the roads in Loopy Lagoon so far. So, I mean, I feel like I'm calling it Loopy Lagoon too much. It might not actually end up being called that, guys, but I'm just saying that's the working title, and I am a big fan of that working title, so it might end up sticking. Velocity Lake's working title was Forest Park, which is a little bit less dramatic and sellable than Loopy Lagoon is, so I think it's got a higher likelihood of becoming the actual name of the park, unlike Velocity Lake's working title. One thing that did disappoint me with Planet Zoo, actually, which makes me a little bit wary of a potential Planet Coaster 2, is that I was really hoping that when Planet Zoo came out, I do beg your pardon, when Planet Zoo came out, I was kind of hoping Frontier would add some sort of car park and roadway system, because a lot of hardcore players of Planet Coaster like building prop car parks in their theme parks to make it look a little bit more believable. But Planet Zoo, because at the moment, when you just build a park in Planet Coaster normally, guests just appear out of this cave at the corner of the map, and you just sort of have them walk along this path to get to the entrance of the theme park, which always looks a bit naff, and I think a lot of people agree with that, hence why a lot of people build these roadway structures, trains that come in and out of the map, other sort of infrastructure systems to make it look a bit more realistic to have guests arrive at the park rather than just them spawning out of some magical cave in the cliff face. And so I was kind of hoping that Planet Zoo might have some sort of feature where you can have a more believable delivery system. But unfortunately, Planet Zoo is exactly the same as Planet Coaster, I think. Their guests, once again, just spawn at the corner of the map, and then they just walk towards the entrance of your zoo. And it's up to the player to try and create this car park, which, is fine. The car parks you can make really nice looking car parks. Like Velocity Lake's car park is horrifically ugly by a lot of standards I see on the subreddit, where I think, my goodness, I suck at this game. But it's fine. But then it just feels a little bit dead. Like, it's fine at the moment in Velocity Lake because Velocity Lake is closed. There's no guests walking around, and it's just kind of a model theme park. But once the park's open, you got guests walking around, I think it will suddenly make the car park look a little bit more kind of shallow and hollow, because nobody's driving up and down this road, nobody's driving through the toll gates, nobody's walking to and from cars. The cars themselves are just static, they don't move. And I think it just really sort of takes away from having a nice looking car park. So I was a bit disappointed that Planet Zoo didn't think of that and have some sort of car park system. I know it would probably be a horrifically complicated thing to implement, but I mean, Planet Zoo it's not like Planet Coaster where they had to build everything from the ground up. Planet Zoo uses a lot of assets from Planet Coaster in terms of the UI and the building tools, and the engine is not that different. I think the engine is not it's not a completely new engine. I think it's just an upgraded version of the Cobra engine that powers Planet Coaster. So they didn't have to do quite as much work with Planet Zoo as Planet Coaster. So they probably had the time and the resources to make a road structure, but didn't. So it's a shame. Maybe in a future game they will, maybe in Planet Coaster 2, hopefully they will have some sort of system that will allow us to build roads, or at least something a bit more believable than just having guests appear out of some mystical cave. One system that kind of does this, and I really liked, and it would be really, really, really like unbelievably easy to implement, would be how a game called what's it called? I think it's got a couple of names depending on which country you grew up in. For me, it was called Theme Park World, but I think it might have also been called Sim Theme Park, or it was a expansion of Sim Theme Park. I don't think the games are functionally very different, but if you've played Sim Theme Park and what I'm about to describe isn't in that game, then that's why. It's because it's in a game called Theme Park World. But it's my understanding that Theme Park World is just what the game is called in the United Kingdom and possibly other regions. I don't know. I must admit I haven't researched this topic, but I'm getting off topic a little bit on the subject of topics. Oh my god. Yes. So it was a very similar map to Planet Coaster, but unlike Planet Coaster, where at the edge of the map there's just a cave, in Theme Park World the gimmick is that all the maps are islands, and at the entrance of where the guests would spawn in Planet Coaster in Theme Park World, there's just like a jetty, like a pier, and then a boat just pulls up at the pier. Loads of guests just walk off the boat, go off the pier and into the park, and then the boat drives away, and then another boat comes up. Maybe something like that. Like maybe just something simple, like a bus. Like have a bus that pulls in, or a train that pulls in. Ideally, something that the player can choose, like be it a boat, a train, a bus, an airplane, a helicopter. Like there's a game called Evil Genius, which is a great game, by the way. I highly recommend it. It's on Steam, I think. It was on Steam at one point because I bought it on Steam. But it's great. You play as a James Bond villain. You have this big deserted island, and you've got to build a base inside the island and run all of your nefarious schemes from the island. And, you know, when you hire henchmen and indeed bring back loot, etc., from the island, they pull in via helicopter. Like the helicopter will land at this helicopter pad that you can kind of expand upon. There's a jetty, there's a boat. I think there's like a James Bond analog. In fact, there's a few secret agents in this game that raid your island, and they appear in various different ways, like via a submarine and a speedboat. I think it's been years and years and years since I've played Evil Genius, so I could be wrong on a few of these things, but that's the general gist. Like something as simple as that. It doesn't need to be like an entire planet skylines, my goodness. It doesn't have to be an entire city skylines incorporated into the game. Just something simple I think would be nice. Just any kind of upgrade on the current system would be great. So Frontier, I know I exist because one of your, I don't know if any of this is confidential, but I didn't sign an NDA, but Frontier will often send me stuff about the game. Like they gave me a free copy of Planet Zoo to play on this channel, and I didn't play it. I downloaded the game and played it for a bit, and it's a really good game. I really, really like Planet Zoo, but I just don't have the same passion for zoos as I do for theme parks, and there's also the ethics thing. I've always felt a bit uncomfortable around zoos. Like, yeah, they do a lot of conservation work, and even SeaWorld do a lot more good than harm in the grand scheme of things because they donate so much money to marine life conservation and research. But yeah, at the same time, what they do with their killer whales, it's a very questionable ethic. So zoos have always been a bit of a touchy subject for me, and I've never really enjoyed visiting zoos as much as I have in visiting theme parks. So for theme parks, I love going to theme parks. They're like my favorite things to visit in real world. And so I get really excited at the prospect. I can design my own. Wow, I can put a whiskey bar in it. I can design my own. It's going to be really, really cool. But zoos, I'm like, I've been to like 4 zoos in my life. 2 of them were rubbish. And it's whatever. It's a zoo. So I don't really have the same passion that I get when I don't get the little tingly feeling that I get when I think about the idea of building my own theme park. And speaking of building my own theme park, we've pretty much done that. I've built my own theme park. There it is. A nice overview of Velocity Lake, and thus concludes episode 65. I do hope you enjoyed it. On the left-hand side is a link to the full Velocity Lake playlist. The right-hand side was chosen for you by YouTube based on your viewing habits, so I don't know what that video is. That's the end of the episode. Like I say, I do hope you enjoyed it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an excellent Wednesday.